A few weeks ago, in Part 1, I told you about the so-called Snapchat murders. Two teenage girls went for a walk together in broad daylight and didn't return home. In their last moments, they took photos and recorded a video themselves. These files would later ensure that their case became known around the world. However, what exactly happened to Abigail Williams and Liberty German is still not fully understood today.
Police continue to search for two teenage girls who went missing early yesterday.
Indiana tonight, the reward is growing in the hunt for the killer of two teenage girls.
While we looked at the events surrounding the murder and the immediate aftermath in the first part, in this part we want to look at what events and insights have been added to the investigation in the years since 2021. Therefore, we are processing all of this piece by piece. And we will devote a great deal of attention to the question of who killed the two girls, and above all, why. This case is about social media, about failures in the investigation, years of uncertainty, a new suspect, and new evidence that changes everything. But before we talk about that, let's start from the beginning.
There is somebody out there that did this horrendous crime, and we're going to track him down.
Tonight, a suspect is now under arrest, charged with the murders, and authorities revealed just today that he was hiding in plain sight for 5 years.
Well, I believe they sacrificed a girl and killed another one.
It is February 2017, and Abigail and Liberty are best friends. Abigail Williams is 13 years old, Liberty German is 14. The two girls do everything together. The friends are growing up in Delphi, a town in the U.S. state of Indiana. It is a small town with a population of just over 3,000. About an hour and a half's drive from the city of Indianapolis. Delphi is a typical small town in the United States. It has a main street, quiet residential areas, a few small shops and restaurants, but above all, a lot of nature. Liberty and Abigail, who are called Libby and Abby by friends, are in the 8th grade. Both play saxophone in the school band and are practically inseparable in their free time as well. The two girls love sports. Abby likes to play volleyball, and Libby also plays volleyball, as well as softball and soccer. The friends enjoy going swimming together, love camping trips, and are interested in photography. Abby also has a big heart for animals, especially for her cat Bongo. Libby lives with her grandparents and her father together with her older sister Kelsey. Libby and Kelsey's mother live several hundred kilometers away in Kentucky. The girls spend every free minute together. Both are popular and have many friends. But the friendship between Abby and Libby is particularly close. Abigail and Liberty have another hobby in common besides sports and trips into nature, namely true crime. The two are very interested in crime and might want to work in law enforcement or become forensic scientists later on. And it is precisely this interest in true crime that will ensure that many years later a suspect can be arrested in their case. But first things first. Before we can talk about that, we have to go back to the day when everything changed in the tranquil town of Delphi. To February 13th, 2017, the day Abby and Libby were murdered. On February 13th, 2017, middle school students have a day off. It is a Monday, so the children have a long weekend before Valentine's Day. That's why Abby's parents don't have a problem with her spending the night at her friend Libby's house from February 12th to 13th. Abby and Libby spend the evening of February 12th with Libby's sister Kelsey. The girls eat pizza, watch movies, and chat with each other. The next day, Abigail and Liberty sleep in. It's already 10 o'clock when they get up. For breakfast, they have pancakes on this day off. After that, the girls don't really know what to do with their day off. Abby and Libby don't have any concrete plans for the afternoon yet. Around noon, the two of them decide to go for a walk. They want to go to a small hiking trail in the area, the Monon High Bridge Trail. The weather is very good on this February day. Libby often goes to the Monon High Bridge with her family. It's a popular destination for hiking or biking in Delphi, so it's perfect for one of the first warm days of the year. Libby and Abby ask Libby's older sister Kelsey if she wants to come with them to the high bridge. But Kelsey already has a date with her boyfriend. Besides, she still has to work in the afternoon. But Kelsey offers to give Libby and Abby a lift and drop them off at the Monon High Bridge. Libby's father, Derek, is then supposed to pick them up again at the bridge in the afternoon. It shouldn't be too long a trip. The hiking trail along the Monon High Bridge only takes half an hour. The girls say goodbye at Libby's grandparents' house, and the three of them get into Kelsey's car. The older sister turns on loud music on the car radio. The song is Heavens by 21 Pilots. Abby and Libby are in a good mood and sing along loudly. Kelsey parks her car right in front of the entrance to the hiking trail that leads to Monon High Bridge. It is 1:49 p.m. when Libby and Abby get out of the car and say goodbye to Kelsey. It will be the last time Kelsey sees her little sister Liberty and her friend Abigail. Monon High Bridge is, as the name suggests, a high bridge. It has been disused since the late 1980s and was used for rail traffic in the U.S. state of Indiana a long time ago. The railroad bridge is now a kind of lost place and a popular photo spot for young people in the Delphi area. Actually, there are always walkers or families out and about there. The bridge was built in 1891 and is around 19 meters high. It crosses a stream and runs along the Deer Creek hiking trail. On this day, Abby and Libby are not the only ones walking along the railroad bridge. At around 1:45 p.m., a witness parks her car and sets off on the footpath to the bridge. On the bridge, she sees a man standing about 50 meters away from her. When the witness sees the man, she turns around and walks away from the bridge. In doing so, she passes two young girls. These two girls are walking in the direction of the bridge, and thus also in the direction of the man. It is possible that this witness was watching Abby and Libby, as well as their future murderer. Of course, she had no idea what would happen in the next few minutes.
Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill. Guys. Downhill.
At 2:07 p.m., Libby posts her last photos on Snapchat. At this point, the girls have been on the road for more than 15 minutes. If you don't use Snapchat, all posts in the app automatically disappear after 24 hours. It's basically the same as with Instagram stories. Libby and Abby both use the app daily to communicate with their friends, so it's natural that they would take advantage of the trip to Monon High Bridge to take a few photos. And it's also natural that they would share these pictures with their friends directly on Snapchat. Libby uploads two photos to her Snapchat story. One shows 13-year-old Abby crossing a wooden bridge. She looks down and seems to be concentrating on the path in front of her. Her hands are in her pockets. The other photo is a black and white shot of the same bridge. No people can be seen in this second photo. Abby must have been standing right next to or slightly behind Libby when the photo was taken. It will be the last sign of life from the girls. Later, a video will be found on one of the girls' cell phones. It shows the last moments of Abby and Libby. At 2:13 p.m., a 43-second clip is recorded on Libby's cell phone. Only part of the recording is later released. It shows a man walking toward the girls. He instructs the girls to go down a nearby hill. One of the two girls says later in the recording that he has a weapon. It is assumed that the man forces the two girls to go down the hill. The three of them move to a remote property. There, the girls are murdered with a knife. In broad daylight, on a popular hiking trail in the middle of the idyllic small town of Delphi. At 3:57 p.m., a woman named Sarah is driving near Deer Creek. As she passes by, she sees a man at the side of the road who looks very dirty, possibly from mud or blood. He's wearing a dark blue jacket just like the man on Libby's cell phone video. Sarah may have just witnessed a double murder. On the afternoon of February 13th, the families of the two girls alerted the police. They were very worried because they could not reach Lib. Although a meeting point and time had been agreed for the girls to be picked up in the afternoon, the two did not show up. Libby's father, Derek, waited in vain for his friends at the beginning of Monon High Bridge Trail. While still on the way, Derek called Libby on her cell phone at 3:11 p.m. There is a dial tone, but Libby does not answer. Instead, Derek leaves a message on her voicemail and tells her where he will park shortly and wait for the girls. At first, Derek does not think much of it. It's not the first time the girls have lost track of time. So Derek decides to walk the Monon High Bridge Trail himself, hoping to pick up Libby and Abby along the way. But even though Derek walks slowly back to the bridge and then back again, there is no sign of the two girls. Back at the car, Derek can't find his daughter or Abby either. He first calls Libby's grandmother, then Abby's mother. But neither of the girls has contacted either of them. In the following minutes, all family members start sending text messages to Abby and Libby. But they don't get a reply from either of them either. The adults therefore decide to search the area around the hiking trail themselves. Within minutes, family members and friends of the girls are rushing to Deer Creek to scour the area. Delphi is a small town, so the excitement does not go unnoticed for long. By the afternoon, almost 100 people have come together to search for Abby and Libby. Unfortunately, they cannot be found. Therefore, the Williams and German families alert the police at 5:30 p.m. In the early evening, professional search parties then set off for Monon High Bridge. The police were able to locate the last cell phone signal from Libby and Abby. It comes from very close to the disused high bridge. For the searchers, this is a cause for hope. The girls can't be far away. Nobody initially thinks of a crime. Nothing like this ever happens in Little Delphi, and certainly not in broad daylight. They consider all the other possibilities. That the girls might have had some kind of trouble at home and ran away. That they left the high bridge and got lost, or that one of them might have fallen and the other is trying to take care of her injuries. They say to each other that everything will be fine and that they will surely find Libby and Abby in the next few minutes, especially with the support of the police and the volunteer fire department, which has also arrived in the meantime. But the minutes turn into hours, stretching into the late evening. Unfortunately, the search has to be abandoned shortly after midnight due to the darkness. Neither the two missing girls nor any of their belongings were found. While the police withdraw for the night, the families and volunteers continue to scour the area around the high bridge. Because by nightfall, at the latest, the families are sure that something is very wrong. Libby is very afraid of the dark. She would never voluntarily stray in the dark. The lights of the searchers' flashlights can be seen from everywhere. If the two friends were reasonably well, one of them would definitely have noticed the search parties by now. The possibility that the girls might have simply extended their trip or gone somewhere else fades into the background. Something terrible must have happened to the two teenagers.
A little upset, confused, obviously very distraught. Just worried. All I want to do is have the girls get home safe.
The next morning, February 14th, the investigating authorities also start new search efforts. However, there are some delays. It is very foggy that morning, which makes the search more difficult. Although the state of Indiana has provided a helicopter for the search, it cannot even take off due to the weather conditions. Instead, the search has to continue on the ground. A command center of sorts is set up for the volunteer search parties at the local fire station. In the morning hours of February 14th, more than 300 people gather there to help find Abigail and Liberty. Kayakers are also out on Deer Creek below the high bridge, searching the shallow water. While millions of families in the U.S. celebrate Valentine's Day, the families of Abby and Libby fear for their daughters. The girls' relatives are on site themselves, searching for the teenagers without interruption. Hardly any of them got any sleep the night before. Shortly after 7 a.m., the area around Monon High Bridge is again teeming with searchers. And soon they make a disturbing discovery. First, on the morning of February 14th, a single black sneaker is found. Kelsey German, who is present at the search, recognizes it immediately. It belongs to her little sister, Libby. Of course, the searchers are extremely worried, but there is also great confidence. Finally, they have a lead, a first clue. During the search for the girl, a man notices two deer. They are staying in one place on a somewhat remote hill for an unusually long time, undeterred by the many search parties. The hill is about 1 kilometer from the old bridge. The deer appear to be very interested in something on the forest floor. When the man looks, he finds two bodies. Initially, these cannot be identified, but the search efforts are immediately scaled back. It is not until the next day that a press conference confirms that the two dead women are really Abigail Williams and Liberty German.
Basically, we have identified the bodies of the two females that were found out yesterday. The bodies have been positively identified as Abigail J. Williams, 13, of the Delphi area, and Liberty Rose Lynn German, 14, of the Delphi area.
The police assume that the two girls have fallen victim to a crime. Both have lost a large amount of blood at the place where their bodies were found, which is possibly also the scene of the crime. Even at this early stage, the FBI is involved in the investigation. The public prosecutor's office initially withholds details of the cause of death and the discovery situation. They only came to the public's attention years later. Nevertheless, I will share with you the information that is already available, even if it was not known immediately after the discovery. I will explain it in more detail later. The police assume that the bodies of the girls were moved again after their death and brought into a certain position. Their limbs are stretched or arranged unnaturally. Libby's hands are stained with blood, as is the rest of her body. Her body was found unclothed. By contrast, Abigail's body was fully clothed, but strangely with Liberty's clothes. She was also found to be wearing two bras. Libby's second shoe and her cell phone were found under Abby's back. The public does not know all this at the time. For tactical reasons, the police withhold a lot of information at the time. However, it is quickly confirmed that Abigail and Liberty were victims of a double murder, and that their killer is still on the loose, probably even somewhere near Delphi. In the early evening of February 15th, the police released a photo showing a man wearing a dark blue jacket, blue jeans, and a brown cap. Investigators believe that this man was at Monon High Bridge Trail at the time of Abigail and Liberty's disappearance. The man is initially sought as a witness with the help of the photo. However, a few days later, the police changed their tone. It is now explicitly stated that the investigators see the man in the photo as a suspect. At the time, the police did not immediately disclose where the photo of the man came from. As a result, speculation quickly flared up in Delphi and on social media. There could be a wildlife camera on the trail that may have recorded the entire crime. But of course, that's not the truth. Surely you've already realized that the photo is a screenshot from the video found on Libby's cell phone. What's special about this case is that Thanks to the girls' presence of mind, there is a photo of their killer. And despite the tragedy, this is an important starting point for the investigators. Delphi is an extremely small town. With a population of just over 3,000, someone must know this man. The media has now started referring to the stranger as the Bridge Man. Although the image is pixelated, at least his build and clothing can be seen. The Bridge Man is broad-built and is wearing a dark blue jacket and blue trousers, probably jeans. He has his hands in his pockets, and it looks like there is something in them. He is also wearing a cap that he has pulled down low over his face. The investigation is intensive and extensive from the outset. A hotline is set up for tips from the public, which is available 24/7. The authorities offer a reward of $41,000 for information relevant to the investigation. At the time, there is great confidence that the killer will be found quickly. After all, there is a photo of him. But the confidence fades from day to day. Instead, the so-called Snapchat murders will become one of the most talked about true crime phenomena. While the police are searching for the murderer, the families of Liberty and Abigail have to process the sudden loss of their daughters, granddaughters, and sisters. The two girls' classmates are also disturbed by the events. Monon High Bridge is one of the most popular destinations for young people in Delphi, and now 2 of them have found death there. On the evening of February 18th, a public memorial service for Abby and Libby will take place. Thousands of mourners will gather in front of the girls' middle school. The guests will release hundreds of lanterns into the night sky to commemorate Abigail and Liberty. The tension is palpable. Every resident of Delphi knows that the killer of the teenagers could be among them. More than a week after the bodies were found, the police still haven't been able to find the perpetrator. The investigators are increasingly coming under pressure. On February 22nd, the police therefore decide to publish an important piece of evidence. It is the audio track of a video found on Libby's cell phone. It is the audio track on which you can hear the bridge man giving the 2 girls the command to run down the hill. Previously, only the screenshot was published. In connection with the so-called Snapchat murders, thousands of tips are received by the police. But there is no arrest. On July 17th, 2017, the police released a sketch of the alleged suspect. The murder of Abby and Libby had already taken place 5 months earlier. The drawing shows a middle-aged man with a beard and reddish-brown hair. The police add that the suspect is about 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, 165 to 170 centimeters. Tall and, based on his build, must weigh between 176 and 220 pounds, 80 to 100 kilograms. The description is a composite of the cell phone video and witness statements. At the same time as Abby and Libby, 3 other teenagers were walking along the high bridge. There they encountered a man whose description matches the man on the cell phone video. The man seemed somehow creepy. As he walked by, he also took care not to show his face to the children. After the picture is published, some men volunteer to provide DNA samples to the police. They do so because of their visual similarity to the sketch. Conversely, the police also approach people who look similar to the picture and ask them for DNA samples. If people refuse to provide these samples, the police will seek a search warrant for the person's home address. 2 years later, the police will release a revised version of the sketch. The man they are looking for now looks different, slimmer and younger, and without a beard. Unfortunately, none of this helps. The murderer of the 2 girls cannot be found, even though there are several suspects. Over the next few months and years, there will be quite a few suspects. In the small town of Delphi, the rumor mill is running hot after the double murders. Photos of the bridge man and details of the case are spreading rapidly through social networks. Everyone seems to have their own theory about who might be responsible for the murders of Libby and Abby. Some of these suspicions, especially online, are based on pure speculation. This is mainly because the police are very sparing with details. Everyone is a suspect, and there is a lot of speculation. Sometimes about one of the police officers in charge, who seems particularly emotional at press conferences, or about any old person who has ever said or done something strange in the eyes of the amateur investigators. Below, we will look at a few of the people whose names have been mentioned in connection with the double murder. It is important to note that only one person was ever charged with the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams. We will talk about this person last. However, in order to approach the matter as objectively as possible, we will look at several potential suspects, as mentioned above. And we start with the man on whose property the bodies were found. One of the first people to be interrogated in connection with the case is Ron Logan. He is questioned on the same day the bodies are found. He is the owner of the property where the bodies of Liberty and Abigail were found. Ron also has a criminal record for drunk driving. In addition, he's said to have been violent towards a partner in the past. During the relationship, there were also sexual assaults. This partner stated during an interrogation that Ron always carried a gun. An ex-girlfriend of Logan's later said in an interview that she was certain the voice on the released video clip belonged to Logan. Ron Logan was 77 years old at the time of the double murder, and he owns numerous hectares of land in the area around the old railroad bridge. Right from the start of the case, Ron Logan approached the press himself. In February 2017, media representatives flocked to Delphi. Everyone wants to get photos and video footage of the crime scene and the area around Monon High Bridge. Ron willingly shows journalists around Deer Creek and shows them where the bodies of the two girls were found. He takes every opportunity to emphasize that he had nothing to do with the double murder. Many find this defensive behavior very suspicious.
I can't really wrap my emotions around it yet. It's so mind-boggling. I haven't really caught up. It hasn't caught up with me yet. The area that they were in is very hard to get to. I mean, you can't get there unless you walk there. I mean, so somebody would be walking with them or something.
In cases like this, it often happens that people like Ron Logan are quickly suspected, especially online, of course. But the police are also promptly investigating the possibility that Ron Logan had something to do with the double murder of Libby and Abby. So they are considering whether he could be the bridge man they are looking for. As already mentioned, the investigators in charge quickly set up a witness hotline that receives thousands of tips. And a total of 15 of these anonymous tips relate to Ron Logan. 15 people independently say that they believe the bridge man is Ron Logan. One of the callers is also Ron's ex-girlfriend, who believes that his voice can be heard on the recordings. A police report also states that his stature matches the figure in the video, and his voice is at least consistent with the voice on the video. On March 6, 2017, Ron Logan's home is searched. Officially because he is said to have violated his parole. More than 100 firearms are found. This first search is followed by a second. The search warrant for the second search explicitly states that Ron Logan is a murder suspect. Therefore, Ron Logan's home is also of interest to the investigators. And according to the police document, Ron is said to have tried to provide a false alibi. On February 13th, the day of the murders, Ron was at a recycling center between about 11:30 a.m. and noon. This is documented by surveillance camera footage. During the search of his house, a receipt for an aquarium shop was found. The Aquarium World in Lafayette, Indiana. The receipt shows that Ron shopped there on the day of the double murder at 5:21 p.m. The shop is located about a half-hour drive from Ron Logan's house. He must have left before 5 p.m. to visit the shop. The video of the man on the bridge was taken shortly after 2 p.m. So in theory, even with the visit to the aquarium store, Ron would have had about 2 hours, maybe even a little longer, to commit the double murder. As will be revealed later, Ron calls his cousin the morning after the murder of Abby and Libby. He asks him to testify to the police that he picked up Ron at his home between 2 and 2:30 p.m. and drove him to the aquarium shop. So Ron is asking his cousin for a false alibi here. In his own interrogations, Ron states that he was picked up by his cousin at 3 p.m. The cousin admits to his false statement in this regard in a second interrogation. Ron Logan's alibi is therefore invalid for the time being. In addition, A call was made from Ron's cell phone number at 2:09 p.m. on February 13th, and in the immediate vicinity of Monon High Bridge. At 7:56 p.m. and 10:16 p.m., Ron's cell phone number receives a text message. According to the radio signal, Ron's cell phone was outside his apartment building both times and in the approximate area where the bodies of Abby and Libby were found the next day. It is not entirely clear why, in the end, no further action was taken against Ron Logan. Therefore, it should simply be emphasized once again that he was never charged with the crimes against Liberty and Abigail. The fact that he was demonstrably in the vicinity of Monon High Bridge does not necessarily mean anything. After all, the 77-year-old owned properties in the area. In February 2022, Ron Logan died of complications from COVID. Even after his death and the arrest of a later suspect, whom I'll tell you about in a moment, Ron Logan's ex-girlfriend still believes that he is the murderer of Abigail and Liberty. The police, on the other hand, seem to rule out Ron Logan's involvement. And it can be assumed that the police have good reasons for this, even if we don't know them and the procurement of a false alibi does not cast Ron Logan in a good light. As we have already heard, the cell phones of Abby and Libby play a very important role in this case. And when Liberty's cell phone is analyzed, the police come across something quite shocking. The video not only shows the alleged murderer of the two friends, but also a chat log with a person who could have been dangerous to the teenager as well. One of the last people Libby chatted with before her murder was Keegan Kline. However, Libby believed she was writing with a completely different person. Keegan later admitted that he had created a fake profile on Instagram and Snapchat. Under the name Anthony Shots, he poses as a young male model. In the picture he uses, he looks completely different than in real life. He then writes to teenage girls with the intention of getting intimate photos of girls. And apparently, he had also been in contact with the murdered Liberty German. That's why he was quickly considered a person of interest by the authorities, but never an official suspect. On February 25th, 2017, a search warrant was executed at his home. He lives with his father in Peru, Indiana, about 40 miles from Delphi. That same day, Keegan Kline was also questioned by the police. During the search, several technical devices were confiscated, but not the iPhone that Keegan was said to have used to communicate with the victims. He eventually turned this cell phone over to the police voluntarily, but not until March 2nd, 2017, almost 2 weeks later. When the iPhone was analyzed, it was found that numerous files on it had been deleted. The police were only able to partially restore them. In the days following the Delphi murders, he's said to have repeatedly researched the double murder online. Keegan is also said to have sent Libby messages on Snapchat even after he knew she was dead. Keegan Kline was not only in contact with Libby, but also with one of her friends. This friend of Libby's is said to have told the police that she messaged Anthony Schott, Keegan Kline's alias, about the disappearance of the girls. According to this friend, Keegan is said to have written that he had an appointment with Libby. However, she never showed up. Whether Keegan Kline really wrote this and when and how specifically this meeting with Liberty German was planned can never be determined. However, what the police find during the search is enough to charge Keegan Kline later. A total of 30 charges related to child exploitation and child pornography are brought against him. Libby is not the only girl Keegan Kline has been in contact with. He not only used the pseudonym Anthony Schott, but also posed as a teenage girl named Emily N. He used these fake profiles to contact girls between the ages of 12 and 18. He later stated that his motive was that he had never been successful in the real world of dating. That's why he started using fake profiles at some point and writing to minors with them. Keegan Kline was ultimately sentenced to 43 years in prison. It is now ruled out that he had anything to do with the Snapchat murders. What is disturbing, however, is the fact that he had contact with Libby at all. Years later, in early 2022, it was revealed that Keegan Kline's father, Tony Kline, was also under investigation. At the time, it was reported that the planning for the meeting between Keegan Kline and Liberty German was indeed said to have been specific, and that this meeting was supposed to take place on the Monon High Bridge in Delphi. But the police now believe that not only Keegan Kline used the account Anthony Schott, but also a second person living in his household. And in 2017, when he was in contact with Libby, Keegan Kline was living with his father, Tony Kline. Years later, in a podcast interview he gave from prison, Keegan Kline said that his father did, in fact, have access to this account. He thus confirmed the police's assumption and presented his father as a possible suspect. At the time, it was speculated that Tony Kline might be arrested at a later date for the murders of Abby and Libby. However, this will never happen. Tony Kline was never charged with the double murder, nor was his imprisoned son Keegan. On July 28, 2019, a man named Paul Etter is to be arrested. He committed a sex crime a month earlier and is wanted for questioning. However, Paul Etter takes his own life before his arrest. It is repeatedly noted that Etter looks very similar to the phantom image. Since Paul Etter lives about 50 miles from Delphi, he's investigated after his death for possible involvement in the murders of Abby and Libby. However, in the course of the police investigation, there is no evidence that would suggest involvement. In April 2021, it was announced that a new suspect was under investigation, James Brian Chadwick. He also comes from the state of Indiana. He's actually arrested for a different crime on April 19, 2021. In his neighborhood, a 9-year-old girl disappears. During a search, the girl is found in the basement of his house, unclothed and severely frightened. In addition, the child has bite wounds all over her body, presumably from Chadwick's dogs. The girl's abduction occurred about 20 miles from Delphi, the site of Libby and Abby's disappearance. For the crime against the 9-year-old, he is charged with attempted murder, child abuse, attempted child abuse, kidnapping, false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and strangulation. James Brian Chadwell has a criminal record that includes assault and unlawful possession of a weapon, among other things. Many believe they can see a resemblance between Chadwell and the two phantom images. Speculation is fueled by James Brian Chadwell's tattoos. On his arms, the offender bears the images of two girls with blood running from their mouths and eyes. Many social media users believe they see a strong similarity between the tattoos and Liberty and Abigail. This raises the question for many whether Chadwell could have gotten the tattoos as a kind of trophy after the alleged murder of the girls. However, the suspicion against Chadwell in relation to the case of Abby and Libby can never be substantiated. Chadwell is convicted and imprisoned for the crime against the 9-year-old girl. The hunt for the murderer of Abigail Williams and Liberty German continues. Until, more than 5 years after their murder, there is a major breakthrough. In October 2022, there is finally an arrest in the case of the Snapchat murders. 6 years later, a man named Richard Allen is arrested. Richard Allen is 50 years old, comes from Delphi, and is now suspected of having murdered Abby and Libby. Richard Allen has been married to his wife for more than 30 years and has a daughter with her. He has no criminal record and works in a pharmacy in Delphi. Libby's grandmother says that she therefore also knows Richard a little. Richard once printed photos for Libby's funeral service as part of his work. He gave the family friendly advice and seemed very respectful and polite to them at the time. The police's sketches are even displayed in the pharmacy where Richard works. For 5 years, he stood next to these identikit pictures every day without anyone associating him with the images. Before his arrest was announced at a press conference, his name had never been mentioned in connection with the Snapchat murders. The reason for Richard Allen's arrest was not disclosed at the time, only that he was arrested for the murder of the two girls. Dates for initial court hearings were also announced immediately, which is actually rather unusual. In the U.S. state of Indiana, where this case takes place, there is a peculiarity. Legally, no distinction is made between first or second-degree murder or accessory after the fact. This means that the sole indictment of Richard Allen does not necessarily indicate that he is supposed to have committed the crime alone. It could theoretically also be that Richard Allen had accomplices. This is also emphasized by the public prosecutor's office. This is possibly the reason why the facts that led to Richard's arrest are being kept under wraps for the time being. It was only later that it became known that Richard Allen had been on the police's radar for quite some time. In fact, since 2017, shortly after the murders of Abby and Libby, the current suspect was already questioned by investigators. At the time, Richard had contacted the police as a witness. He stated that he had been at Monon High Bridge on February 13th. That was the day the two teenagers were murdered. Richard even told the police that he had been wearing a blue jacket and blue trousers that day, maybe a cap too. He can't remember that exactly. His clothing would match exactly that of the bridge man in the cell phone video of Libby. After the 2017 interrogation, however, according to the investigators, a mistake was made in the database. Instead of Richard's real last name Allen, the name of the street where he lives is stored as his last name. As a result, Richard Allen's interview transcript could not be found for a long period of time because it was incorrectly filed. It was only found years later and evaluated again. As a result, new measures were taken against Richard Allen. During a search of Richard's home, knives and firearms were found, among other things. An unspent shell was found at the scene that matched one of the firearms. The bullet was found under a layer of leaves and soil between the bodies of Abby and Libby. On the day of the search, neighbors also saw a pile of dark fabrics and some books being carried out of the house by police officers. In addition, his garden was searched. They also dig in two places, but without success. Richard Allen admits to having been at Monon High Bridge on the day of the murders, but he denies having seen Abby and Libby there and having killed them. Even after Richard Allen's arrest, the hotline set up for tips and information remains open. Although the police have finally arrested a suspect and thus an alleged perpetrator, the chaos surrounding the Snapchat murders is only just beginning. In November 2022, Judge Benjamin Diener withdraws from the case. He cites the exceptionally high level of public interest and pressure in the Snapchat murders as the reason for his decision. He does not feel up to the task of conducting the proceedings. Even before the trial against Richard Allen can begin, there are problems at the legal level. Therefore, the state of Indiana assigns the case to a new judge, Francis Gull. In addition, the state has to take care of providing Richard Allen with public defenders. Richard Allen cannot afford his own lawyers due to the media coverage of the crime. After some time, he gets two public defenders, Andrew Baldwin and Bradley Rossi. The defense strategy that these two lawyers come up with a year later shocks everyone.
Richard Allen has been in custody for nearly a year. In this latest motion, his attorneys make some explosive allegations and argue someone else killed Abby and Libby.
In September 2023, Richard Allen's legal defense team presents a theory to explain the double murder of the two girls and exonerate their client. Allen's lawyers claim that the murders of Liberty German and Abigail Williams were Odinist ritual murders. Richard Allen was framed as a suspect by law enforcement to divert attention from this cult. The defendant is innocent. In the United States, Odinism is considered to be at the center of a white supremacist cult. As its name suggests, it is centered on the worship of the Norse god Odin. It is a reconstructed faith, which is only an interpretation of Nordic myths and legends. And because it is a reconstruction and interpretation, it naturally allows a great deal of leeway for incorporating racist ideas into this belief system. And according to Richard Allen's defense team, a religious splinter group is responsible for the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. When this defense strategy becomes public, the media outcry is huge. Understandably so, because the lawyers are not only making serious accusations against the prosecution, but they are also claiming that the Snapchat murders were a ritual. Richard Allen's defense team submitted a 136-page document as justification. I will quote a lot directly from this document in this section. Not because I support or believe the defense's version of events, But because the whole issue is so complex, the filing from Richard's attorney states, overwhelming evidence in this case establishes the following. Members of a pagan Norse religion called Odinism, adopted by white nationalists, ritually sacrificed Abigail Williams and Liberty German. The new information from Richard Allen's defense changes everything. A possible ritual murder had never even been considered before. At least as far as the public knows. The defense team claims to have learned from police circles that the investigation had been looking into an Odinist ritual murder from the very beginning. However, this approach was dropped in March 2017. The evidence for this theory was found scattered across no fewer than 10 hard disks and several flash drives provided by the prosecution, which means that the defense is not making wild accusations, but is primarily sharing facts and information that are supported by the prosecution's own discoveries. Even discoveries that the prosecution did not provide to the defense until September 8, 2023. So the defense of Richard Allen also accuses the prosecution of withholding evidence from them. In the following, we will take a look at what Allen's lawyers believe is the evidence that an Odinist cult was involved in the murder of Abby and Libby. Probably the most important point on which the thesis is based is the discovery situation of the bodies of Libby and Abby. Before Richard's defense presented this new theory, there was little to no information about it. So, for the most part, we have only information from the defense of Richard Allen regarding the crime scene. Keep that in mind. One of the few pieces of information that became known early on was that the bodies of the two were moved and positioned afterwards. And according to the Richard Allen team, the whole thing was done to fulfill an Odinist ritual. The discovery situation of the bodies of Abigail and Liberty is presented by the lawyers of Richard as follows. Libby is lying on her back, her left arm extended and touching the root of a tree. Her right arm is placed along her body. On her left shoulder is a long branch that extends from her shoulder to under her legs. Two other branches arranged in a V lie on her upper body, with the tip of the V in her crotch and the two ends of the branches pointing to her shoulders. Her friend Abby lies on her back with her arms bent. Her left leg is stretched out, while her right is bent at the knee and crossed under her left. Three branches are lying on her chest, with two smaller twigs to the left and right of her head. According to the prosecution's interpretation, the branches around Abby's head represent a kind of antlers or horns. The defense interprets the positioning of Abby's body as a recreation of a painting called Odin Hanging from the World Tree. Richard's attorneys believe that the branches and twigs on the girls' bodies were part of the alleged ritual. The twigs and branches were never taken as evidence from the location of the bodies, so they can no longer be examined. The only thing that remains as a basis for the investigation on this point are the crime scene photos. The defense also believes to have recognized a rune at the scene. There is a blood trail of Libby on a nearby tree. It looks like a partial handprint. The defense, however, recognizes it as a Nordic rune. It resembles the letter F and can be identified as one of the many business cards of this pagan religious sect with a simple Google search. The defense is presumably referring to the rune Fehu, which symbolizes prosperity in the broadest sense. The piece of bark with the bloodstain on it was also never taken from the scene. In addition to these points, the defense also notes that there is no forensic evidence linking Richard to the location where the bodies were found, except for the bullet casing that matches a weapon found in his house. Otherwise, there's nothing to suggest that Richard Allen was ever at the exact location where the bodies were found. No cell phone data, no fiber traces, or DNA. The defense has another point of criticism. At the very beginning, I told you that there was a witness who saw both Abby and Libby as well as a man on the bridge on February 13th. According to her, Abby and Libby ran straight towards the man. The defense claims that the police never made this witness's description clear. The documents only ever speak of a man. In fact, however, This witness is said to have described the man as young, in his 20s, with a clean-shaven face and a very youthful appearance. This description was to be the basis for the second sketch, which was later released and showed a much younger suspect. And this second sketch, or the witness's description, does not match the 50-year-old Richard Allen, who has a full beard. But the police had said at the time that this new sketch was more likely to match the perpetrator than the first one. Now, however, the police are changing this information again and emphasizing the similarity between Richard Allen and the first sketch. Another argument in his defense is Richard Allen's strikingly short height. He's only 5 feet 4 inches tall. The average U.S. male is 5 feet 9 inches. Richard Allen is exceptionally small. The defense believes that this detail would certainly have been mentioned by witnesses if Richard Allen had seemed suspicious to them. In their extensive document, the lawyers also claim that the police investigated 2 groups of Odinists for their involvement in the crimes. When Richard Allen appeared on the investigators' radar, however, the investigators dropped this line of inquiry. Richard Allen was framed for the crime in order to find someone responsible. In the letter, the lawyers name 5 men from Indiana who should be investigated by the district attorney. These 5 men are said to be the followers of the Odinist cult who allegedly murdered the girls. The defense claims that the police did not sufficiently question a man named Brad Holder. Brad Holder is said to come from the Delphi area and to practice Odinism. According to the defense, he's said to have a connection to Abby. It is said that Brad Holder's son was in a relationship with Abby. Thus, unlike the defendant, Richard Allen, he has a proven direct link to one of the 2 victims. The defense document states the following about Brad Holder. Brad Holder posted pictures on social media that exactly mimic the runes found at the crime scene. A crime scene that has not been made public to this day and is unknown to the public. The defense believes that the court will be shocked by the number of clues or Easter eggs, both before and after the murders, that Holder openly posted on his Facebook page that suggest his involvement in the murders. Richard's lawyers write that Brad was investigated at the very beginning of the case. In March 2017, however, the police ruled him out as a suspect. But a single police officer continued to investigate the lead independently and stumbled upon a network of alleged Odinists. The officer then passed his report on to higher-ranking officers. However, they did not follow up on his leads. In addition to Brad Holder, the document names 4 other men: Elvis Fields, Patrick Westphal, Rod Abrams, and Johnny Messer. None of these men had been suspected of the double murder up to this point. Nevertheless, Richard L.E.'s defense now claims that these 5 men killed Liberty and Abigail in an Odinist ritual. According to the lawyers, the men belonged to a group called the Vinlander Social Club, or VSC for short. And according to Richard's lawyers, this group makes use of symbols of Odinism. The ADL describes the Vinlander Social Club as a hardcore racist skinhead gang. According to the ADL, individuals associated with the Vinlander Social Club are responsible for numerous crimes, including 9 murders. In fact, photos exist of both Johnny Messer and Patrick Westphal showing the 2 of them with gang symbols. It is said that VCS member Johnny Messer was allegedly out and about in the Delphi area with his Vinlander buddies on or around Valentine's Day 2017, the day the 2 girls were found dead. This information comes from Johnny Messer's ex-girlfriend. She's also said to have told the police that Johnny borrowed her car for the trip to Delphi. One of the other 4 accused men, Patrick Westphal, lives there. Brad Holder, whose son is said to have had a relationship with Abby, lives nearby. When Johnny returned from the trip and gave the car back to his ex-girlfriend, he noticed dried blood on the side of the car. When she asked Johnny about it, he refused to explain the bloodstains on the car to her. Johnny's ex-girlfriend also stated that she needed to wash the car several times to finally remove the blood. Meanwhile, Messer has claimed that he has never been to Delphi, the hometown of his brother Patrick Westphal and near the home of his fellow Odinite brother Brett Holder, not even once in his life. According to the document, his ex-girlfriend describes Johnny Messer and Brett Holder as 2 of the most violent people they know. She claimed that, in her opinion, they were fully capable of being involved in the murders. Richard Allen's lawyers describe how the police even tapped Johnny Messer's cell phone at times. In 2 conversations, Johnny spoke with other people about wanting to hurt or kill someone. In a 3rd intercepted phone conversation, Johnny bragged about holding a person hostage and shooting them in his house. Despite the results of the wiretap, the police decided not to pursue the investigation against Johnny Messer and his friends. Neither he nor Brett Holder or Patrick Westphal were ever interrogated in connection with the murders. Another man who, according to the document, is linked to the murders is Elvis Fields. He allegedly told his sister on February 14, 2017, that he was part of a gang and was on a bridge with 2 girls who were killed. The conversation is said to have taken place on the same day that the bodies of Abby and Libby were found. Elvis also reportedly mentioned a person named Abigail who was a pain in the neck and a troublemaker. Elvis also tried to give his sister a blue jacket during this conversation. The sister refused because she already had one. Maybe you remember that the so-called bridge man was wearing a blue jacket. So Richard Allen's defense is implying that Elvis Fields tried to get rid of a potential piece of evidence by giving the jacket to his sister. Elvis's sister only found out about the Delphi murders later and then contacted the police to report the conversation she had had with her brother. She went to Delphi in person with her husband at the end of February or beginning of March 2017 to talk to the police on the spot. Richard Allen's team now claims that Fields' sister's statement was probably overlooked at the time. A little over a year later, Fields was questioned by the police after all. He also agreed to a mouth swab. This allowed his DNA to be compared with traces found at the crime scene. After that, Elvis is said to have asked one of the investigators what would happen if his spit was found on one of the girls, but he had an explanation for it and whether he could get into trouble then. Another of Elvis Fields' siblings also claims that he has made a number of incriminating statements about the murders. In an October 2017 conversation, Fields allegedly told an older sister,
"I'm in a lot of trouble. I'm going away for a long time. I was on the path and the bridge with these girls when they were murdered. There were 2 other people with me when it happened. I spat on one of the girls after they were killed."
Elvis is also said to have described putting pieces on the head of one of the girls to make her a cuckold. Allen's team claims that law enforcement authorities once again failed to follow up on anything Elvis Fields said, and that, although, according to this account, he knew obvious details about the crime scene that were never made public. So Richard Allen's lawyers are accusing 5 men of committing a gruesome double murder, even though the police never saw any reason to intensify their investigation against these men. After the accusations, at least one of the 5 men takes legal action. Johnny Messer is defending himself against the accusations and has sent the following words to a U.S. newspaper. "As much as I want to defend my name, I respectfully decline to comment at this time. I am taking legal action. This has turned my life upside down and put a heavy strain on my family and my mental health." Incidentally, the prosecution describes the 136-page document from Richard Allen's defense as colorful, dramatic, and highly unprofessional. I would have liked to have presented the prosecution's refutation and counterstatement to you in this video in just as much detail, so that I could also present counterarguments to this odinous theory. Unfortunately, however, the prosecution has not yet provided a comparably comprehensive response. As the document is published in 2023, expectations regarding the trial against Richard Allen are rising. Everyone wants to know how the prosecution will refute the accusations and odinism theories. Actually, it should be ready in the fall of 2023 until something goes terribly wrong. The explosive accusations made by Richard Allen's lawyers have been followed by a series of rapid developments. As the defense team, one of the 2 lawyers for the defendant, Richard Allen, Andrew Baldwin, has several employees in his firm. One of them is 41-year-old Mitchell Westerman. At some point, he quits Baldwin, but remains friends with him and visits him at his office from time to time. At the time, Andrew Baldwin was defending Richard Allen, the alleged Snapchat killer. During one of his visits, Westerman sees crime scene photos from the case on Baldwin's desk. These are, of course, very, very sensitive photos, because they show not only the discovery situation of Abby and Libby, but also their corpses. During his visit, Westerman photographed these confidential images with his cell phone. According to current knowledge, the following then happened. Westerman sent the photos to an acquaintance, who in turn sent the photos to a third man. And this man is said to have passed the photos on to various YouTube and podcast formats without being asked. So, of course, to people who were never supposed to see these photos. On October 5th, 2023, the police were made aware of this leak. They were able to locate the person who first received and then forwarded the photos of Mitchell Westerman. This man, who was not named by the authorities, committed suicide after the interrogations. But the leak has further consequences. Not only was the distribution of the photos a traumatizing event for the recipients and the families of the girls, but the unlawful publication of the photos has also postponed the trial against the main suspect, Richard Allen, by 10 months. The judge in charge, Frances Gull, immediately drew consequences. She accuses the legal team of incompetence. In response, both lawyers dropped the case. This means that Richard Allen now has no lawyers. But of course he needs them so that the trial for the murder of Libby and Abby can start against him. Judge Frances Gull then assigns him new public defenders. However, for a fair trial, the defendant in the double murder case must also be given the chance to build a legal team that has thoroughly researched the case. And with a crime as complex as the murder of Abigail and Liberty, that unfortunately takes a few months. Originally, the trial against Richard Allen should have started in January 2024. Due to the leak, the first hearing was scheduled for October 15th, 2024. But the story doesn't end there. Because Baldwin and Rossi claim that they did not voluntarily withdraw from the case at all. They never wanted to give up the defense of Richard Allen in the first place. Instead, Judge Frances Gull forced them to resign. That is why the two are taking the case to the Indiana Supreme Court, which agrees with them. Rossi and Baldwin are allowed to resume their mandate for Richard Allen. After the Supreme Court ruled in their favor, they are, of course, more than a little annoyed with the judge in charge, Frances Gull. After all, she is supposed to be unbiased before the trial against the defendant. But after the scandal and the temporary withdrawal of Rossi and Baldwin, they no longer see that as a possibility. And so they are now demanding the immediate removal of Frances Gull as the judge in charge. In the motion filed on January 29th, 2024, it states, "In this case, there is no discernible legal basis for Judge Gull to continue to preside over this case. At every stage from now until the conclusion of this case, the court's actions and decisions will be viewed through the lens of Judge Gull's error in severing Richard Allen's attorney-client relationship with his chosen counsel. Furthermore, Richard Allen's lawyers write that the court has violated one of the most sacred rights of the Constitution." Once again, the defense is making extremely serious accusations against the court and against the state. Even in June 2024, Richard Allen's lawyers are still trying to remove Frances Gull from the case. They accuse the judge of being biased and favoring the prosecution and the district attorney's office.
The defense attorneys for Richard Allen, Brad Rosie, and Andrew Baldwin made another attempt to disqualify Judge Fran Gull, but Judge Gull isn't having it, and she spelled out exactly why in this 6-page document filed in Carroll County.
The trial is currently still scheduled to begin in October 2024. We will see whether it will really remain that way despite all the turmoil. The whole legal mess surrounding the crime scene photos plays right into the hands of Richard Allen's defense. Even before all this happened, his lawyers were already claiming that Richard had fallen victim to a major framing campaign. While Rossi and Baldwin were off the case, another attorney briefly had the mandate. Even after this lawyer was no longer responsible for Richard Allen and the case was back in the hands of Baldwin and Rossi, he spoke out in favor of Richard. The lawyer says that he, too, is now convinced that there is something to the ritual murder charge.
I thought it was hocus pocus. I honestly didn't, I'd never heard of it. And the more I got into it, that's a real thing. It is a real thing, and it's scary. Well, I believe they sacrificed a girl and killed another one.
The current defendant, Richard Allen, is said to have confessed to the murders several times during phone calls he made from prison with his wife. He's also said to have confessed to his mother during a phone call that he was responsible for the deaths of Abigail and Liberty. In court or to police officers, however, he still maintains that he is innocent. His legal team states that, based on the evidence, the murder was most likely committed by the Odinists, and Richard Allen has no connection to this group. Richard Allen's defense attorneys go even further. In their letter, they state, "It is no coincidence that members of the same pagan cult serve as law enforcement officers for the Indiana Department of Corrections at the Westville Correctional Facility. In the cold concrete walls of the maximum security unit of this dilapidated penitentiary, Richard Allen is threatened, intimidated, and psychologically abused." The lawyers are not only attacking the public prosecutor, but also the prison where Richard Allen is currently awaiting trial. They now allege that prison staff are members of the same Odinist cult that is allegedly responsible for the murders of Abby and Libby. 2 prison employees are said to wear patches on their uniforms that read, "In Odin we trust." Only after the defense team even recognized the supposed connection to Odinism did the 2 employees remove the patches from their uniforms. In addition, numerous photos of Nordic runes can be found on the private Facebook profiles of the 2 prison employees. The 2 prison guards are being questioned by the public prosecutor about this, by the way. They deny any connection to an Odinist community, but they admit that they actually wore the patches. However, they say they only wore them to express their personal beliefs. But they claim that this has nothing to do with Odinism as practiced by Richard Allen's defense team. The 2 prison guards removed the patches after their supervisor asked them to. They also admit to having injured Richard Allen twice with a stun gun during his detention. He had not followed their instructions beforehand. After Baldwin and Rossi were appointed as lawyers, they sought to start the trial as quickly as possible. In early March, they requested that the trial against their client, Richard Allen, begin within the next 70 days. Judge Francis Gull grants the request and sets dates for mid to late May 2024. The prosecution then requests that certain information and arguments be restricted for the trial. This includes arguments involving Brett Holder, Patrick Westphal, Johnny Messer, Rod Abrams, and Elvis Fields. In other words, the people on whom the defense bases its Odinism thesis. Interestingly, the list also includes Keegan Kline and his father, as well as the owner of the property where the girls were found murdered, Ron Logan. So basically, almost everyone who was ever connected to the double murder of Abby and Libby. Shortly before the scheduled start, the trial was postponed again. This was actually at the request of the defense, which wanted to extend the duration of the trial.
Richard Allen's attorneys asked for 15 days during the trial to present their defense case. The trial was set to start Monday with jury selection, and it was only scheduled for 3 weeks. While the judge refused to extend the trial past May 31st, she instead rescheduled it to last for 5 weeks from October 14th through November 15th.
Now, it is expected that the trial of Richard Allen will take place between October 14th and November 15th, 2024. And that Liberty German and Abigail Williams will hopefully finally receive justice, more than 7 years after their murders. A lot has happened in the case of the Snapchat murders in recent years, so much so that articles, podcasts, and documentaries are now often much more about the suspect and less about Abigail and Liberty. Unfortunately, despite the seemingly endless flood of information about the case, there is still no clarity. Instead, more and more loose ends seem to be emerging around Delphi, which are fueling speculation and rumors. And the more time passes, the more difficult it will be to learn the truth about the death of Abby and Libby. Near Monon High Bridge, there is now a very special memorial for the two, the Abby and Libby Memorial Park, a green space dedicated to the 2 murdered girls. There is a large meadow, a playground, a sports field, and a small stage for music events. children and adults from the Delphi area can do everything that Abby and Libby loved so much in the memorial park. Play softball, run around outdoors, and listen to music. The park is a place where children's birthdays are celebrated, friendships are formed, and athletic tournaments are held. This has all been made possible by individuals and businesses in Indiana. They came together to create a place of peace and joy near the Monon High Bridge, where Abby and Libby were killed. The case of Abby and Libby will keep us busy for quite some time. Although the trial against Richard Allen was so long in coming, the legal disputes between the prosecution and the defense have been enormous so far. Now, when the long-awaited trial of Richard Allen finally begins, I will provide a comprehensive update. In the meantime, I'm interested in your thoughts on the case. If you've seen both parts on my channel, you probably already have one or two ideas about what really happened behind the murders. But a story like the one the lawyers presented to Richard Allen is truly unique. What's your opinion on this? Do you think it's a tasteless exaggeration and overkill, or could there be some truth to it? I look forward to discussing it with you in the comments. At the same time, you also support the channel. With every interaction, the video is more likely to be suggested to people who are not yet subscribed to Insolito. Thank you in advance. Otherwise, there's not much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, or whichever time it is where you are watching this video, and I hope we'll see each other again in the next video. Until then, bye guys.